Colby again. I am not coming to you from my church office like I have been the last couple weeks. Instead, I am here in my kitchen. Just like you all, I am stuck at home. I'm here 24/7, except for the occasional walk around the neighborhood. But I am trying to make the best of my situation, and I hope all of you are too. And actually, one of the things that has been really encouraging for me this past week is to hear about all the different types of things that you are all doing to stay connected to each other. I've heard about the Facebook groups that have been started, the Zoom and Google Hangout video conferences that have happened, the snail mail style postcards you all have been sending to each other. It's really encouraging to me that you are all so committed to Jesus and to one another during this time. Keep it up. We just finished our Doubt It series last week. And next week, we plan on continuing on with a new series on Jesus. It'll fit nicely with Good Friday and with Easter coming up just right around the corner. So that's something to look forward to. Today, though, I want to just take some time to really address the elephant in the room. This week, we are going to be talking about disappointment. If I'm going to be honest here, I am really disappointed that I can't see you all in person for Access. And I know that I'm not alone in this type of feeling. I know all of us, or at least a lot of us, are pretty disappointed right now. So let's talk about that. And without further ado, let's jump into this week's Access Online.
Number of people have continued to ask about giving. So just in response to those questions, yes, you can still give. There's online giving. You'll find that on our website. You can sign up. I've talked to people that have done it. It's very quick. You can drop things off here at the office or put it in the old-fashioned snail mail, and it'll get to you. And to actually all those that are watching, whether you're part of the trust and the Lord leads you between your heart and Him.
Have you ever experienced something in your life that was just really disappointing? Maybe you were excited for that one movie to come out in the theaters, but it ended up being kind of lame. Maybe you were looking forward to a nice meal only to find it kind of bland. Maybe you purchased a new video game and once you started to play it, you found it boring and unimaginative, or maybe you bit down into what you thought was a chocolate chip cookie only to discover that it was a disgusting oatmeal raisin one. Or, on a more serious note, maybe you were excited for this year's spring break only to find yourself stuck inside in coronavirus quarantine. Maybe you were looking forward to this year's track season and robotics tournaments and band concerts and spring dances and everything else that's now been either canceled or postponed because of this virus. I know that I was really looking forward to going Easter caroling with you all next week at Access, but here we are now, safe, but stuck inside our homes. Ever been disappointed in something? I imagine that a lot of us can now answer with a resounding yes. Well, if that's the case, I just want to say right off the bat that it is okay to feel these feelings. It can be healing to name these emotions, and the God we serve wants us to bring all of this before Him because He is both big enough to hear them and is powerful enough to do something about them. Did you know that there is a book in the Bible dedicated to big feelings? It's called the Book of Psalms. And Psalms are poetry. They're songs and heartfelt prayers. They're deep expressions flowing from a place of intense feeling. We need to understand that before we really can understand what we're reading within this book. That's because poetry is a special type of language. It's a way of writing that says more and says it more intensely than ordinary language does. That's not to say that other parts of Scripture aren't as intense or as heartfelt, but this type of expression really is the hallmark of poetry and in the Psalms. They're powerful. And just like music does today, the Psalms have a bunch of different genres and styles to them. We've got rock music, but the Psalms have songs of ascent and royal psalms. We've got pop music, and the Psalms have poetry that has to deal with thanksgiving and praise. We've got the blues, and the Psalms have songs of lament. And there's even a type of psalm called imprecatory, which are kind of judgment and anger psalms. That is what Psalm 137 is, which is a poem that we are going to be visiting in just a moment. But if we were still trying to make this comparison type of thing, imprecatory psalms, they might be like modern punk music or something like that. They're angry, they're disappointed and fiery about it. They're not afraid to express big feelings. But, and before we get into the specifics of Psalm 137, I should probably caution you that while these texts are dynamic and are really powerful, they don't do everything. Psalms are not commands. They aren't "thus saith the Lord," if you know that expression. While Psalms, they are very much scripture, they don't have the same canonical function as books like Genesis or Deuteronomy or Romans do. The various authors who penned these poems and prayers were writing just that, really, poems and prayers. They were expressing their emotions and not necessarily trying to teach the people of Israel heavy theological concepts or utter divine decrees. However, that doesn't mean that the Psalms can't teach us anything. They can and do teach us important things about the God of heaven, and they can help us express our emotions in healthy ways, especially in times when we might be feeling some pretty big emotions because of the disappointments we might be feeling because of the coronavirus quarantine. Let's check out Psalm 137. The first verse reads, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept when we remembered Zion." In other words, the Israelites wept when they remembered their homeland, what once was. And it continues on. "Our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, 'Sing to us one of the songs of Zion. But how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?'" Do you feel the pain that's just bleeding from the author's pen here? Do you feel the anguish they're expressing as they long for better days? Psalm 137 starts off with a poem of homesickness and heartbreak. Something terrible has happened to the author, and he's having a really hard time trying to cope. Let me give you a little bit of background on what's going on in Israel's history at the time of this psalm's writing. Israel, or more specifically the southern kingdom of Judah, had been living relatively peacefully for about 100 years. Because of sin, the northern kingdom had just fallen to the warlord nation of Assyria in 721 BC, but the Lord had spared Judah from the Assyrian armies. And there seemed to be even a period within that 100 years where Israel at least seemed to be getting themselves back together again. Under a guy named Josiah, the nation had started to make some major reforms. The Torah law was found once again, and the nation had begun to follow God's laws, something that they hadn't done in a really, really long time. And for a while, they were even blessed with a bit of economic growth because of it. But the prophets of God were still warning Israel to go and to get their act together. Injustice and bloodshed and half-hearted faith were still major themes of the day. Israel had gotten a little bit better in some ways, but they had gotten a lot worse in other ways. So eventually, the Lord, he did something about this. He empowered a nation called Babylon for their judgment. And in 597 BC, the Lord sent this foreign nation to overthrow and to conquer this southern kingdom of Israel. And Babylon was absolutely brutal. They were the biggest, most powerful nation in the world at that time. No one could stop them or get in their way. And Babylon, if anyone went up against Babylon, they were just completely wiped out. And Israel was absolutely no exception to this. In fact, when Jewish historians talk about this period in Israel's history, they put it right up there with the likes of the Holocaust. It was that bad. Have you ever played the board game Risk? If so, you might know that one of the quickest ways to lose is to have all of your troops just spread too thin all over the board. If you don't have a big enough army positioned in one central specific area, another player can come and just wipe out all of your other troops pretty quickly. Well, Babylon, they understood this too. When Babylon conquered a nation, they would take different groups of people as captives and they would disperse them throughout other territories that they had already conquered. A father could be taken away from his family and placed about 100 miles away. A mother could be taken from her children and forced into slavery in a different country altogether. Brothers and sisters were separated. And they did this to intentionally distill a sense of hopelessness upon those that they had conquered. If the nation's citizens were split up and exiled, they couldn't organize themselves together for rebellion. They couldn't create an army any longer. And by the way, if you didn't comply with this, it was a pretty common practice for a Babylonian judge just to pluck your eyes right out of your skull so you couldn't see where they were going to send you next. Or they might just cut the lips right off your face or the tongue right out of your mouth so you couldn't talk back to them any longer. It was brutal. Just imagine never seeing your house in the family that you've been living with for generations ever again. Those little tick marks against your door frame that measured how tall you were at the beginning of last school year, those were gone. All those happy little places where you made special memories in, they were destroyed, likely burned up in a fire. By the river of Babylon, they sat and wept. These people remembered what once was, and they knew that it would probably never be the same again. And how dare their captors wish them to sing Jewish songs of praise for their entertainment, as they talked about it in verse 3 through 6 of this psalm. They were in a foreign land. They were exiled. It was not a time for praise. It was a time for homesickness, hopelessness, disappointment, and grief. But that's not where this psalm stops. The author, he had a little bit more anger to voice. The nation of Israel had a neighbor to the southwest called Edom. And the Edomites and the Israelites, they really didn't have the best of relationship. They tolerated each other at the best of times, and they absolutely hated each other at the worst. In Psalm 137, it expresses one of those gut-hating moments. When Babylon was marching their war machines toward Judah, the nation of Edom cheered them on. They were happy to see Israel go. And more than that, the Edomites had made a political alliance with the nation of Babylon. They struck a deal of sorts. After Babylon conquered Israel, the Edomites were allowed to come in and settle along the southern borders of Israel. They were allowed to farm their land and live in those once occupied Hebrew houses. The people of Israel, they were not only homesick, they were stewing in their boots, knowing that many of the people of Edom, the people who cheered Babylon on when they set fire to Jerusalem, were now living in their families' former homes. So with that in mind, it makes sense when the psalmist writes in verse 8, "O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall be he who repays you with what you've done to us." And even the last verse of this psalm, verse 9, while almost embarrassingly and shockingly harsh, is understandable within this really, really painful context. "Blessed be he who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. Blessed be he, O Edom, that takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock." By the way, this is probably a good time to remind you again that the Psalms aren't commands. They're not law texts. The last verse is not giving us a charge to go out and find the descendants of Edom and rough them up a bit. And this verse is also not saying that the Lord himself feels this way about the Edomites either. Spoiler alert, I guess, but if you've never read this book before, but the end of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, where George shoots his mentally handicapped best friend in the back of the head, that was not a statement that John Steinbeck, the author, hated all mentally handicapped people. That was just an expression, or at least an explanation of the action that had to be taken because of the dire situation at hand. And it's similar with verse 9 in Psalm 137. "Babylon and Edom have ravaged Israel and caused a great deal of hopelessness and heartache and homesickness within them." And the author, he needed to express the big emotions that he was feeling. He needed to name them. And again, he knew that one of the best ways to do this was to direct these feelings toward a God who can handle hearing them and a God who is powerful enough to do something about them. But back to us. What might Psalm 137 teach us about our quarantine situation? How can its words and expressions help us cope with our feelings, our similar feelings? Well, first of all, we obviously do not have a one-to-one comparison between our quarantine because of this virus and Israel's exile because of Babylon. They had it way worse. They experienced pain on a much larger scale and for a much longer time than we are now. But that is not to say that our disappointment, the disappointment that we are all going through, isn't real or isn't painful. And just like the author of this psalm, a lot of us are probably experiencing a lot of big emotions about all of this. Is graduation going to be canceled? Will we be able to make up our track meets and our band concerts this summer? The complete unknown about all of this is frustrating. It causes anxiety. It stresses us out. It is real. And I think that Psalm 137 can show us something really, really important in relation to all of this. It is completely okay to express hard emotions. It's all right to vent to the Lord our frustrations and anger. We don't have to hide behind a fake facade or pretend to be all right, because the God we serve already knows our situation. In fact, it's pretty unhealthy to keep strong emotions pent up inside of us. It's better to express these types of things to God than to act on them in an actually violent or destructive or harmful way. I mean, even the act of praying to the Lord and confessing these types of feelings can bring comfort even in itself. But the God we serve hears us, and he is powerful enough to do something about our pain. We all will face trials and disappointing times in life. God does not expect us just to pretend that all this stuff isn't real. Instead, he is there for us. He listens to our prayers, and through the cross is working to make all things right once for all. Let's end this video today with a couple of challenges. First, if you are struggling with disappointment, don't keep it to yourself. Don't minimize it. Don't pretend it isn't real, because it really, really is. Instead, pray to God and express your disappointment to Him. Tell Him exactly what you are feeling and why you are feeling it. And maybe consider sharing that information with a trusted friend or your small group leader too. We're in the midst of this together, so let's make sure that we're here for each other along the way. And second, try to make the best of your situation. Don't just sit there in your sorrow. Go for a walk. Make a blanket for it and watch a couple good movies within it. Call up a friend that you haven't talked to in a while. Play that bingo game that Sarah and I passed out a couple weeks ago, and send us the pictures of you playing it. But no matter what you do, remember this: our situation is only temporary. This quarantine will not last forever. We will be back again someday soon, and we can have great hope in a God who listens to our prayers and through the cross is working to make things right once and for all. See you soon.